Hi everyone. So now we're going to get into how to actually use Tableau. And when you all download the Tableau file from B courses, this is the page that you will arrive to once you open it up in Tableau. And you'll see right here that on the left-hand side, this is where all of your column names in your data set will be located. So we're going to get to this in just a sec. The first thing I wanted to do is show you the data source that we'll be using. So for the purposes of our Tableau modules, I already preloaded the data set that we're going to be using into this module. So there's no need to download it. So what I did here is I went to the data source. We were on sheet one, and I pressed this um, up arrow here just to open up the data set. So this is kind of like in R when you import your data set, you can see what it looks like. So this data set is a pre-made Tableau data set called World Indicators. It's an open source data set and it has a lot of cool data. And I thought that we could use some of this data for the purposes of our modules. So you can see here that this is a fairly large data set. There's a lot of variables in here. And I'm just going to point out a few of interest to us. So we're going to be looking at birth rates globally. So this variable is going to be interesting for us. Countries, of course. The health expenditure percentage of GDP. That's something we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at infant mortality. This is probably one of the more important variables that we'll be looking at. We'll also use life expectancy of a female. And we'll also use the region and year. So I think that now that we saw kind of what the data set looks like, I wanted to do one extra step that will kind of clear things up for us while we're still here. So as you notice, all of this data right now, you can see it's organized by year. So this is all the year 2000 right now. Um, and I wanted to kind of point out that this data set has an observation for each country for a year. So just to kind of illustrate that, I'm going to add a filter here, and this is how you would do that. And I want to add a filter on the country region variable. And this is just country, and I'll show you how to change this label so the region's not there. So I'm just going to filter for the United States, for example, just so we can see. Oh, I didn't want to do that. None, United States. And I'm going to apply that. So now we're going to apply this filter. And now our data is filtered. So we can see that the country is only the United States and the year is 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, all the way up to 2012. So this just goes to show that each country has a unique row for each year um, from 2000 to 2012. So I'm going to remove this filter because obviously this is way too little data to work with for what we want to do. So I'm just going to go back in here, and then I'm going to click remove. So now the filter's gone, and the data is going to repopulate back to normal. So now that we've taken a look at the data, let's go back into sheet 1. So now that we're in sheet 1, I wanted to just briefly explain what a sheet is. So similarly to an Excel spreadsheet where you can have multiple pages, that's kind of what a sheet is. So on each sheet, we're going to be making a unique visualization that then we will add to the dashboard that we are creating in the last step of this. For now, we'll just be creating one sheet at a time. And we're going to start with a Choropleth map. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename this sheet actually. So I'm going to right click on this and I can rename the sheet similarly as in Excel. So rename this Choropleth map. And now I'm going to show you how quick and simple it actually is to make these maps in Tableau. So what we're going to do here is we are going to start to drag some of these variables, some of these column headers over to the appropriate field. And right here, this is the column. So this is basically like the column name of your data frame and also like your x-axes. And rows are obviously like your observations in a data frame. And in Tableau, this is often known as your y variables. So for now, let's just think of this as your x variables and this is your y variables. And Tableau has a lot of things going on under the hood, so you really don't have to worry about that as much. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take this longitude variable, and you can see that this is automatically generated here. So Tableau has this neat feature. If you have a country or a city, it'll automatically generate those latitudes and longitudes because it has some functionality under the hood that kind of does this stuff so you don't have to hard code it out on your own, which is a very nice feature. So we're going to take this longitude and we're going to drag this to the columns, which is our x's, which longitudes are the x's on a map. And then we're going to drag the latitudes onto the rows, which are the y's of a map. So you'll see here that that Tableau already identified that we put in latitudes and longitudes without any data really yet, that this is a map. And it already created a map of the world for us. So now that we have this, let's fill in the countries. So actually, now that we're here, I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to rename this. So I'm just going to right click and then go up to rename. And I'm just going to get rid of this region because one, we already have a variable for region, and two, it doesn't give us anything extra. This country/region variable just means country in this data set. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this country and I'm gonna drag it over to this marks box. So I'm gonna plop it onto detail, which is essentially the information that is stored within your visualization. So this kind of is a very nice way to loop back to marks and channels in data viz theory, where marks are the kind of shape or geometric object that we're going to be communicating something with, and the channels are color, size, labeling, the details. So I'm basically going to add country to detail. So now what that did is it populated our map with all of the unique countries. So if you hover over this, this is the United States, this is Mexico, this is the Bahamas, the UK, Congo, Saudi Arabia, India, etc. So it was very fast, and Tableau just knows that now we're adding the country column to the detail, and it links that country column to these latitudes and longitudes automatically. So that was pretty neat. And we're going to add a little bit more detail here because we don't want to make like a leaflet map. We don't want these circle markers. We want this to be a Choropleth map. So we want the colors to be represented by a certain variable. And in this scenario, I'm going to choose to use infant mortality rate, which is right here, because that's going to be one of the key indicators that we're looking at. And I want to use the infant mortality rate to color our map and for each country to have a unique color based off of the infant mortality rate. So before I take the infant mortality rate and drop it onto this color channel, what I'm going to do is I want to convert this to a percentage. So as we saw in the data source, we go back to here. The infant mortality rate is a proportion. So that's a little harder to understand sometimes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to convert these to percentages. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new column and essentially mutate and multiply this by 100 to get a percentage value. So the way you do that is I'm going to take infant mortality rate. I'm going to right click on this. And then I am going to go down to create and create a calculated field. So once you click on that, this will pop up. And I'm going to name a new column. So this is like in your dplyr mutate command. This is where you say what you want the column name to be. So I'm just going to call this infant mortality rate. And I'm going to add this perk. So we know that it's a percent. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that by 100. And it says right here that the calculation is valid. And I am going to click apply. So now we see that in the data, we now have a new column for the percentages. So if we go back to the data source, we will also see this column right here. Oh, sorry, guys. We'll see it right here. So you see them right side by side by next to each other. And this came from the original data source. And we see that this is a calculation. So I think that's a pretty neat way to track your changes. And Tableau has a very kind of intuitive way of doing that. So while we're here and we created that percentage of infant mortality column, I'm just gonna edit a few of these other columns while we're at it before we get into um, further sheets. So what we're gonna do is I also want to convert this to a percentage, and this might be a little bit confusing because there's a percent sign here. This is still a proportion. So I'm just going to perform that again. I am going to go down to create calculated field, and I am going to name this health exp percent GDP, and I'm going to call that perk right there. And right here, you see that this shows you that the calculation contains errors. You can drop down. It gives you a syntax error. So it does help you troubleshoot your code, kind of like an R. And now we're multiplying that by 100. We're going to apply, and voila, we have a new column. And for the last column that I want to edit, I want to edit birth rate because we're going to be using that too. And that is also a proportion. So I'm going to go to create, go to calculated field, and I'm going to multiply that by 100 once again. And I am going to rename or give this a new name. So I'm going to apply that. So that should do it. I think for all of the data pre-processing before we start dragging and dropping these onto our map and other subsequent sheets. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the infant mortality rate percentage, and I'm going to drop that onto color, onto the color channel. And boom, we have a Choropleth map. So we can zoom in, we can zoom out, and we can see when we run over each country, it tells you the name of the country because that is part of the detail. And it also tells you the infant mortality rate because the colors are now associated with infant mortality rate. And not to get too ahead of ourselves, some of you may be questioning, oh, that some of these infant mortality rates seem kind of high. And how can you have an infant mortality rate that's in the like over 100%? That doesn't make sense. And why does this legend show that the infant mortality rate ranges from 3% to 162.7%? That's pretty nonsensical. Well, the explanation for that is because when we drag and drop in Tableau, Tableau assumes that we want to be aggregating the data. So it basically performs a group by and summarize and counts up all of the infant mortality rates for each country. And for our purposes, the reason this didn't work is because we have a time series data set where each country has a year associated with it per column, per row. So as I showed you guys earlier, if we go back to the data source, each country will have like 12 different observations, each being a different year, ranging from 2000 to 2012, I believe. So the way we're going to fix that, and it's really neat with Tableau, is we are actually going to add the year column to pages up here. And you can see right away that the infant mortality rate changed pretty dramatically. Now this makes a lot more sense. It ranges from 0.2% to about 14%. And we also now have this interactive component where we can sort through the year. So we can go from year to year and kind of see how the map evolves and see the pages change here. So this 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, et cetera, et cetera. So you can also control this by dragging this, and you can press play, and it will automatically go through the years for you. And you can see that the colors in a lot of the countries are changing from to a little bit of lighter tones, because we can kind of already see that the infant mortality rate is decreasing over time. So now, while we're over here, let's change these legend titles and colors. So I'm going to right click right here, and I'm going to edit the colors first. So I want to communicate something, and what I want to communicate is the infant mortality rate. And a good way to do that is to indicate that some places are doing better than others, is to use some sort of continuous scale that includes red. So red is the high infant mortality rates. So Tableau has a great like preset color palette for that, which is this red gold that we're going to be using. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to apply. Press OK. So now we just changed the color scheme, the color palette that's being used, and it updated automatically here and on the map, which is really cool. And the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to right click on this again, and I want to edit the title of this legend. So right now it's this really confusing title, and we don't want to confuse our viewers. So we're going to get rid of the sum, and I'm just going to get rid of that. And instead of the perk, I'm going to replace that with a percentage sign. So now when a viewer looks at this dashboard, they'll know that they're looking at an infant mortality rate, which is a percentage. So they'll know that these values are percentages. So now when we hover over the map, we will see that the percentages now make a lot more sense, and they're based per year. So if right now everything's in 2012, but if I, dragged and dropped this to 2006, you'll see that all these percentages are from 2006. So that's a really cool way to promote some interactivity. And we can see that for Greenland, we don't have that. That's a missing value. So this is just a cool way to kind of explore your data. And I just want to demonstrate that we can add more detail to each country. So we can say for example, what the health expenditure percentage of GDP it is. So we're going to drop that onto detail too. So now we'll also see what percentage of GDP countries spend on their healthcare as well. And for example, we can also look at the total populations. We can add that to the detail as well. So now we see the country populations as well. So you can keep adding as much detail as you want, really, to give your audience more interactivity and to get a better sense of the data. So last thing that I want to do here is I want to fix this title up here. So I'm gonna click on this little, you can't right click on this, you have to click on this little down arrow and go to edit title. And we're just gonna make this year. We do not need to keep it in this format. That's not really user friendly and it might just confuse somebody. So we're gonna change that to year. And for now, we are done with the Choropleth map, and we did that very quickly, very efficiently, and honestly with very minimal coding. The only little bit of kind of pseudo code we had to do was to create these percentage wise columns. And other than that, Tableau allowed us to create this just by using a point and click method. So I will see you in the next video, where we will be making a bar plot in the next sheet, which will also be a lollipop plot. So I'll see you in the next video.